I think that if we sat down and you asked me what's the most significant thing that has happened to me in the last 6 months, I would, without a doubt, say that it was starting my ADHD medication. Now, I know that the world is divided right now when it comes to ADHD and medication. There are people who literally think that it's just a trend, that people are looking for something to blame for their lack of concentration or failures in life and whatever. Seriously, I've heard people say that to me, that ADHD is not a real thing. And then on the other side, we have a lot of very good researchers and people that are working to help adults who haven't been diagnosed, or even children and the parents of children that are being diagnosed, to, manage it as well as possible, educate them. And we have a lot of research coming out, a lot of theories coming out. So it's literally lit right now in the world of ADHD. Now, I don't necessarily want to get into all the different views and stuff. I will talk about my background and how meds have helped me specifically. Now, obviously, your experience may vary. I know a lot of people who have been diagnosed with ADHD and they don't take medication. They're completely fine. They just needed the education on it, and they have found strategies that help them get through the day without struggling a significant amount. Now, obviously, everyone has ups and downs, and I'll talk about that as well, how, medication doesn't magically take away all your issues and habits that exist as a result of ADHD. And I'll share some stuff that I have talked about with my psychiatrist and what I've learned from him and, psychologists and everything else that's been kind of happening around this topic. But I do want to start off by saying that I was definitely the person who was very paranoid about medication. I think there's actually a proper name for it, which is like medication anxiety or something, where I basically believed that taking medication came with such strong side effects that it wasn't worth it in most cases. Like, I wouldn't mind taking antibiotics. I wouldn't say that I didn't mind, but I would take medication when it was actually necessary, like antibiotics or, whatever. If I ended up in hospital, of course, I allowed them to give me an IV or whatever they needed to do. But if it was my choice and I knew that like my health was not in immediate danger as a result of me not using medication, for example, painkillers or, like flu medicines and that kind of stuff, I would just not do it. I would rather suffer and wait it out than take medication. So obviously, as you can imagine, the thought of taking a pill, any kind of medicine for the rest of my life every day was a scary thought. I think to me that just naturally equaled doom. Like, there's no way my body could survive that without significant side effects. So that was kind of me coming into the world of this beautiful journey that I'm on right now, which is, which has turned out much better than I expected. And maybe some of you experienced that as well, where you try to kind of stay away from medication, stay away from anything that kind of looks suspicious or sounds too good to be true or whatever. And I think that it's a correct mindset to have or maybe not correct, but appropriate in some situations and inappropriate in other situations. So we have to really evaluate each thing on its own and think as critically as we can. This is something that I definitely didn't do for a long time. I just kind of went off of what I've heard from family, from content online, from books that I've read. And as you've probably noticed, content tends to be kind of biased. Like, you can find content to support your view, whatever you believe in. Like, there's something for everyone here. So that's kind of what it was. And when it comes to my actual diagnosis, I kind of had a feeling, like when I learned about the ADHD, because previously I just kind of understood it as, that thing little boys who are naughty have. And I didn't really think it was me, because I was not like I kind of assumed it was for like the loud, popular kids that were just obnoxious and, whatever. And I think a lot of people do that, which is kind of sad, but that's what it means to be uneducated about a topic. You have preconceptions about it, but they are far from the truth. So I definitely didn't see myself as a little naughty boy. So I just didn't assume that ADHD was something that I was experiencing. But I always knew that I was different for sure. I noticed it at school because I couldn't really connect with a lot of my peers. And it was very clear that also they couldn't connect with me. And it was just socially, it was a little bit weird. And then as I went into like my teenage years, I started experiencing like all ranges of emotions. And, it was rough. It was rough. And I'm talking about like emotional outbursts that would be very intense for me, depressive states, and a lot of it was like an emotional swing. I just couldn't find like a place where I felt stable. It was always just up and down. And I do recall being very impulsive and, stuff like that. And then when I went into adulthood, it kind of got more intense at certain parts, like during certain periods of my life. And then it coexisted with a bunch of other things like eating disorders and, anxiety, a lot of anxiety, social anxiety, medication anxiety, definitely depression, and some like OCD-ish behaviors as well that I didn't even know. I didn't identify them correctly at the time because I didn't realize that's what they were. It was only my psychiatrist who pointed it out to me, and I was like, oh, look at that. Who would have thought? Like that's another mental disorder to add to the list. Great. So then I was once at a point in my life where my depressive states got really intense. And the weird thing about it was that they would happen like halfway through my cycle, my menstrual cycle. So they were very closely correlated to that, which meant that basically half of the month I was so depressed that I would just lay in bed and cry. And then the other half of the month, I felt like, I was coming back to myself and I could be happy and I felt like me again. But then 2 weeks later, again, I would spiral. And it was just, I noticed the pattern. So I was, keeping notes and I was researching. And then I came across something called PMDD. And I kind of self-diagnosed myself. And then I read that there's no cure for it. So I was like, oh, great. I'm just going to be like this for the rest of my life. Then I kind of started, doing things to like try and help myself. And I found that's kind of when I started copywriting and traveling a lot as a result of, working online. And that kept me distracted. The dose of dopamine of moving countries and traveling and, partying and doing all these things is very significant. Significant enough to, help you kind of, for me anyway, it helped me kind of raise my level of, happiness, I guess. And I thought that I cured myself. I was like, oh, maybe I was just bored, or maybe it's because I was coming up with all kinds of theories. I was like, maybe it's just because my soul was so sad, like in my previous life, and I just needed to make this change, and now I'm on the right path and it's better. But I was kind of ignoring the fact that even though I wouldn't experience like super deep depression, like before I started this lifestyle, I would still spiral. And the only thing is that I had more distractions, but the spirals would still come, but they would be shorter, and I would have like the capacity or grace of God to pull myself out quicker. But they still came. They never disappeared. And sometimes they were bad. And then I experienced other things like constant fatigue, and, I still experienced the social anxiety and all these other things. So they never went away. But I never went to the doctor or a psychiatrist or whatever, except for that one time when I don't know why I didn't say this when I was talking about that point in my life. So before I started traveling and stuff, I actually went to a doctor. And I told her, because I was really at the lowest low. I don't want to talk about that specific part because it could trigger people, and I didn't give a trigger warning at the start. But yeah, it was very rough for me, and I was at the point where I just wanted to perish, let's put it that way. And I went to the doctor because I was actually scared of that. And I said, I asked her, what could it be? And I pointed out that I experienced these symptoms like just before my period, that half of the month. And she prescribed me antidepressants and told me to take them in that specific week. Now, the problem was that she didn't really educate me on what it is and why she would ask me to take the antidepressants in that time frame, and the whole science behind it. So to me, it just kind of seemed like she just gave me something so I would go home and basically deal with it. And I read the leaflet on the medication, which obviously is very scary. It's like you'll get seizures and pass away. So I was like, oh, like, I don't know if I want to take that, and because she didn't tell me like how this medication would work, I didn't even want to try it. I threw it in a bin and I was like, no. And that's when I started traveling and all that stuff I talked about. Well, my first big change was that I left my boyfriend at the time, which was really sad because, we lived together. We were okay. Like the relationship wasn't bad. We didn't argue or anything like that. But I kind of felt like I needed to do something with myself, like with my mental health. And I felt bad for him for like being with someone who's constantly depressed. I know that this isn't the way I should, like now, if this was now, I would see it differently. Or if my partner was depressed, I wouldn't, feel like, oh, like, what are you doing here? Can you go away? And I know that he didn't feel that way, but I don't know. I just felt like I wanted to leave and give him an opportunity to meet someone else who's not going to be depressed. And then for myself to kind of, fix my life and whatever. And that's why I started traveling and all that stuff that I talked about. So yeah, I was kind of distracted and things were going good, but I've always struggled. Like, even though I was traveling and I was distracting myself, I always had like inner conflicts of, I should have a home, I should settle down. I know a routine would be good for me. But then every time I tried to do that, the moment I felt unhappy, I would book a ticket and fly to the other side of the world. And later on, I realized that the reason I was doing that is because when routine kicks in, there's some kind of boredom in it, or I don't know, something that was triggering a lot of feelings inside of me that would, or maybe it was just that my dopamine was, was falling and I needed to raise it in order to keep like the balance up in my little brain. And then, it just kind of worked like that. I don't know. And I'm saying that because I have read a theory about ADHD, which is closely related to dopamine, and it kind of being like lower, like less dopamine production in your brain. And that kind of made sense to me. Like when I read that theory, everything that I read in it made sense in comparison to like other theories that I read about ADHD. So then I kind of put the two and two together and I was like, is this why I was moving the whole time and like turning my life upside down? And I would do it so impulsively. It would literally be like, Monday I have a bad day and Tuesday I'm on a plane to Mexico, like go figure. So anyway, then I finally came to Poland, and Poland is my home country. It's just that I've never lived here. Like I moved away when I was a kid and, I always wanted to come back here and live here, but then I was in Spain and I was in Mexico and I was everywhere else. So it didn't really make sense for me to like come back here. And I wanted to, like at that point when I came back, it was actually last year in November, I've decided that I'm going to make Poland a home. So I moved to this one city and I started settling down. Like I rented an apartment, I furnished it, everything was going great. And then all of a sudden, like a brick wall, depression hit me. And I was down for 2 weeks, literally, or just over 2 weeks, laying on my floor, crying and just suffering. Now, because I've been to therapy in the meantime, and because I went to therapy not because of ADHD, but because of something completely different. And then at this point, I also want to mention that I already had my diagnosis. Like, I got my diagnosis soon after moving to Poland because I was more educated on ADHD, and I was like, you know what? I am like 100% sure that this is what I've got. Like, it just aligns so well, and it makes so much sense. And by the way, I'm so sorry. I know that I'm jumping from like bit to bit, and the story is not linear. It's just, that's how I do things. Okay, it just keeps you on your toes. So anyway, I had my diagnosis. I knew that it was ADHD. The psychiatrist confirmed it to me. No, that was the psychologist. The psychologist did the diagnosis. She confirmed it to me. She also wanted to do like more tests because she was sure that there was other stuff like coexisting with it. And I was like, I know, I just don't want to do the test right now. Then I fell into that deep depression for like 2 weeks. And, you know, because I've been through so much already, I kind of understood that it's going to pass. So even though I was suffering immensely and I was getting like intrusive thoughts that were very dark and, you know, all these things that are very tough to experience. And I think people that have not been through like mental anguish find it hard to imagine what it's like. But it's literally like, imagine being in the worst like physical pain possible, but it's in your head. But it's not that your head hurts, but it's just like you feel the suffering on like a different level, and then you can't escape it because it's your head, like it's your own brain. You can't distract yourself. Like the only distraction I feel like in those moments is sleep. And because I would feel super tired at the same time, sleep was easy. Plus when you're crying a lot, like sleeping is just, you know, it just comes natural. So it was tough because at the same time, you know, I was working. I didn't want to tell anyone what I was going through because I was worried that I would worry them. And then, you know, they would feel like they need to be around me or whatever. And I knew that I could pass this. Like, I knew that I could get through it. And, you know, as a Christian in situations like that, where I literally feel like I'm suffering and I'm in the worst like moment possible and going through stuff, like my faith keeps me stronger and it keeps me hopeful, and I trust that I'll be okay. And that kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but it's like having a very good friend with you all the time, so you feel supported. Now, I'm not saying that I don't need people in my life, because I do, but in that moment, I was like, you know what? I don't want to put this on anyone because I know it's heavy, and I am 99% sure that I will get through it. 99 because sometimes I was scared, like really scared. But anyway, the 2 weeks came to an end eventually, but the day before that, I said to myself that as soon as I feel well enough, I'm going to the psychiatrist. I was like, I need help. And I don't think it's therapy. Like, I can tell because there was nothing that would cause the spiral. It was something like, it's not a thought that I had. Nothing happened that would send me down that spiral. It was just that all of a sudden I feel a certain way, and it was related to my cycle again. And I was like, I can't, like, this is physical and mental, and I feel like I need support with like the actual chemistry of my brain and my body. So the next day I felt better, and I went online, and I was so discouraged because all the local psychiatrists were booked up to like a month in advance. And I was like, I don't want to wait a month because obviously just before my next period, I'm going to be going through that again. And I just don't know if I can survive it again. It's like I have had PTSD just from those 2 weeks. Like, I was so afraid of, well, maybe PTSD is is an exaggeration. I don't want to upset anyone who has PTSD and make it sound like, you know, I'm just using that to like, I guess I'm just using it to help illustrate what I was going through. Like, I was so scared of going through that again that, you know, I was just desperate to like do something right now before, you know, the next episode comes. So I was looking, everyone was booked up. And then like a couple hours later, I looked again, and there was one psychiatrist who had a spot free for the next day, 6 p.m. And I was like, I'm taking it. I don't care. I need to speak to someone. So I went to his office, and as soon as I sat down, you know, I told him what's happening, and I told him that I think it's ADHD and I experienced these symptoms in a way that would make it look like PMDD as well. And you won't believe it, the guy, it was a specialist, not a specialist, but like he treats a lot of people with ADHD, like adults. And then he said that he's read multiple studies and books, and one of his areas of interest is PMDD. So it's literally like I could not have ended up at a better place. This was the perfect guy for me. So the perfect psychiatrist for me. So he prescribed me the medication, and like he first did a diagnosis with me, and then he, because here the way it works, I know how it is where you live, but you have a diagnosis from the psychologist and then you have a diagnosis from the psychiatrist, and they kind of, both of them form one diagnosis, I guess, and then your medication is prescribed based on that, I think. But don't quote me on that. It could be different. So anyway, he prescribed me a medication called bupropion, and he sold it to me because he said that it's not as intense as Adderall or other ADHD medications that are like strong stimulants. He said that this one is actually not a stimulant per se, but it has stimulant-like properties, and it's often prescribed for depression or ADHD, or even for people who want to quit smoking. So I was like, wow, okay, it sounds pretty chill. And he said to me that it's very liked by patients, and, it doesn't suppress your appetite as much as the other medications. And for someone who has an eating disorder, that's a good thing. So, he just felt like this would be the best fit for me. And he also didn't want to prescribe me other medications, the more intense variations, because with OCD behaviors or like compulsive behaviors and anxiety, Adderall could kind of, boil the pot even more, and then you'd just be more anxious. And, it would like, the way he described it to me was this. He said, so let's say right now you're working and you forget to, or you don't want to check for like full stops and commas and, to check for typos and stuff. He said with that medication, you would be checking like 500 times to make sure everything's there. So he's like, I don't think it's going to be great. We can try it later on, but for now, I would start with this. And he told me that he felt that if I take this medication and my dopamine levels level out, that's going to help with the PMDD and, the anxiety and all the other things, because right now my brain is like overloaded or overheating because of the lack of dopamine, and it just needs to be balanced out. So I was like, Doc, I'm sold. But then I was so scared because in like literally, 2 weeks, I would again enter that phase of my cycle that meant just suffering. And I was like, but what do I do if the meds don't kick in? Because usually they take like 2, 3, or 4 weeks to start working. So he prescribed me some antidepressants. And because he was he was in a way a specialist in PMDD, he said that actually it's very interesting that antidepressants, even though normally they also take weeks to, actually kick in and work properly, he said that for women with PMDD, even taking, that small dose of serotonin when you're experiencing the symptoms, so instead of taking them like beforehand, but actually taking them on the day you start feeling bad, can immediately lift you out of PMDD. So that was interesting. And he he prescribed me Zoloft and said, like if you need it, take it. If you don't, you don't have to, but it's there for you in case you start feeling depressed again. So I went home. I read the leaflets again, but I was like, I'm not scared this time. Like, I don't care. I'm not going to live like this anymore. And I just want to say that if it wasn't for a close friend of mine who talked very openly about her taking meds for her depression, and the way she described it was that it changed her life in a very positive way and made her feel like herself again. If it wasn't for her, I probably would not have given meds a chance. But because of her, that I felt like, what, I trust her, I trust what she's saying, and I think that I should try to. So yeah, I went home, I started taking the meds, and 2 weeks later, obviously I was very scared, but actually I felt fine. Like I felt completely different. I didn't have any of the symptoms I had before. I had like one day where my mood kind of went down and dropped, and I managed to, that day I said, okay, if I feel like this tomorrow, I'm going to take the antidepressants. But the next day I felt fine. So I realized that, maybe actually it's not necessary. So what happened after is, I just continued taking the meds and my symptoms improved so much. So I'm going to like contrast what I felt like before, like everyday kind of stuff, and how I felt after the meds. So a lot of things that I would struggle with is obviously concentration. Like that's the first one. Some days getting through work was just impossible. And also memory. Like I wouldn't register things. For example, once I was at a store and I bought some stuff and I was coming home with like a bag of groceries and a bottle of water in my right hand. And like it was raining that day, and that's significant. I'm going to tell you why in a second. And I came home and I'm taking my shoes off, and then I pick up the bag and I'm like, oh, where's the bottle of water? And I realized it's not there. And I'm like, oh, man, I left it at the store, but I was like, whatever, I'll just drink tap water today, I guess. And then I get in the living room and there's a bottle of water on my coffee table and it has rain droplets on it. And I'm like, it's here, but I have no recollection of putting it there. And I literally entered the house like a minute ago and I don't remember that. And I was so freaked out. I was like, I can't believe my brain is like that. Like, I can't believe that I just didn't register it. And this is just one example, but this would happen all the time. Like I would find a kettle in my fridge, or, things that you find funny. Like now I look back at them and I'm like, that's hilarious. But the reality is that I would spend like a big chunk of my time every day looking for things that I would place somewhere and then I forgot. And it's not, the odd, oh, I lost my keys. It was like every day I would be running around the house looking for my keys, looking for this, looking for that. And it's very frustrating because you realize that you spend a lot of time doing things that you shouldn't have to be doing. Remembering things at work. So often I would just, the most important bits of information would skip my mind and, they wouldn't get done. Or I would have a meeting and immediately after the meeting, I'd forget what we talked about. There were also times where, like I would get a message from somebody that would specify like whatever they needed to communicate to me. And I would I would skip like the most important bit of information. And then I would do the thing and then I'd go back and be like, oh, like I have to do it again just because I didn't read it properly. And this used to happen to me at school all the time. Like I would sit in an exam and then I just skimmed through the questions, I answered them, and then I realized that I actually did them wrong. Or the teachers would point it out to me, like, you didn't read the question. And I was like, true. I would never go back to like check for errors and typos and stuff, which would obviously be picked up by someone else later on. And it's kind of embarrassing when people keep correcting your grammar or whatever because you forgot a full stop or whatever. But it's just like I couldn't get myself to do it. I don't know how to explain it. It just wouldn't happen. Even if I tried, like if I said to myself, okay, I'm going to go through this, I would open the document and it's like I would just have this blind stare and scroll down, and then it turns out that, yeah, I looked through it, but I wasn't paying attention. And the same when I tried to read books, like if I sat down to read, if the topic wasn't particularly interesting to me at that time, I would read the same page 10 times and I couldn't tell you what I was reading. It's like the words were coming in, but after that, I don't know what was happening. So it was a lot of stuff like that. Emotionally, I definitely was very sensitive to a lot of things. So, or, how else could I describe this? Like I would experience sadness very intensely and happiness very intensely. And, the emotions were just very strong for me. And then I would also be more sensitive to the way people acted towards me. So if I felt the slightest bit that someone was just neutral towards me, like not particularly positive, but not particularly negative either, I assumed that they hated me, or if someone was mean to me, that was like the worst thing that could ever happen. But if someone was really nice to me, like obviously I would experience that niceness like tenfold. So I guess that's an upside, but it's also a huge downside. What else? I think also getting like compulsive about things or getting really excited about things only to drop them really shortly after. That was also a big thing. Like I could start a project today and then do a lot of hard work for it for like a month or two or maybe a week, depends how good it was. And then I would just completely lose interest and I couldn't get myself to do it. Or just anything that I wasn't interested in. Like if you're talking to me and you're talking to me about a topic that I just don't find like very, very interesting, I would like zone in and out and I wouldn't be able to like answer you properly because I wasn't listening. And another thing is, like even if I went to dance classes and I was dancing or learning a choreography, it would be so like I saw how much more difficult it was for me to get certain moves in comparison to my peers. And I was like, I was getting so frustrated. I was like, why is it so difficult for me? And then everyone else can get it. And I look so stupid just because I can't get it. So you can imagine like when all of this adds up, you end up feeling kind of, bad because your life is just difficult. It's like you're putting in more effort than the average person to just do the bare minimum. Now, the upsides to ADHD were that I could make decisions very easy. Like sometimes not, but if I made a decision, I would be very quickly to act on it. It wasn't the kind of thing where I would be weighing out the pros and the cons. And I don't know, I would be like, okay, I want to do that right now and I'll do it today. But the downside to that is that I had a weird thing about not understanding time. So to me, like the future didn't really exist. Like I couldn't picture myself being 30 or 40 or 60. Like I just had this kind of concept of like today. And then anything beyond that was just like, I don't know. It just seemed like such an abstraction. And then that also meant that I didn't understand that a project could take 10 months, for example, or even 3 years, or, if I want to save for a house or save for retirement, it's going to be years of saving. Like that didn't exist to me. Like my head just couldn't understand the concept. And then also that meant that I would not time things perfectly. So like I would assume that things would take me longer or way shorter than they actually did. And it just kept happening. Even if I've done things over and over again, I still couldn't estimate correctly how much time it would take me. But yeah, definitely being able to act quick, like being super creative, coming up with ideas, like all of that was super cool. But I would say that the more annoying sides were definitely outweighing. And it caused me significant distress, like most days, to the point where I was like, yeah, I really need help and I need to like change things. Another thing was oversharing. I used to hate that. Like I would just talk too much sometimes and so embarrassing. I don't know. I didn't like that. And people saw it like, oh, she's so bubbly and stuff. But I was like, oh, why did I just say that? I really didn't have to say any of that. And I don't know. I don't like that. So anyway, at first, the symptoms that went away were definitely the depression and the anxiety. I wouldn't say that they went away completely, but what happened is I've noticed that when I started spiraling, it was easier to stop the spiral. It was easier to stop the anxiety. It was easier to stop the compulsive behavior. Like as soon as I caught myself doing a compulsive behavior and I now understood what it was very easy for me to just step away from it. Whereas before, I would do it for like 2-3 hours straight thinking I know I shouldn't be doing this. Like I know it's like wrong. It's compulsive, it wouldn't be anything crazy. It would be like, for example, just like scratching myself, like picking little, like if I felt like a little bump or something, I was picking it. And I swear to you, like I would lay in bed, like ready to go to sleep, and I could do that for like 2 hours straight. And I had no explanation for it. It was just a compulsive behavior. But then after the meds, my hand would like start looking for little bumps to scratch. And then I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And I could just stop. And then I was in shock. Like, how can it be so easy all of a sudden? And then definitely the time before my period became so much more manageable. I'm not going to say that I wouldn't get emotional or that, I didn't feel sad or depressed at points, because I did, but it would just be so much shorter and it would be so much more easy to manage it, just get through it without suffering as much as I used to. And instead of it being 2 weeks, it would be like a day or two before my period, instead of, half a month literally being taken away by feeling awful. And even though it was like a day or two, the intensity would be like 10% in comparison to 100%, which is crazy. But then what's interesting is that my deeper habits started changing just as a result of the medication. It's like, because my brain had the balance that it needed, not only did the acute things change, but also the deeper inner things that led to certain, ways of thinking or behaviors started changing too. And I think that this is just the start. So, for example, one of the things I was thinking about recently is I was thinking about a project, like literally I was like, okay, I think I want to do that. And then I was planning out, and I planned out that it would take me like 9 months to launch it. And I was okay with it. Like, it just made sense. And I was like, I could never, ever in the past understand that. That's something like I would be like, I'm doing it today. And, it would just make sense for me to do it there and there and start straight away. And I would make a lot of bad decisions as a result of that. Whereas here I was like, yeah, 9 months seems reasonable. And I was like, who is this girl? Like, I don't recognize myself, seriously. So that was one thing. Another thing is the emotional, like being affected by others' emotions, or like how other people treat me, and like being very sensitive to that. Like, I have a new level of chill in me right now. I understand that, for example, if someone is being mean, like, yeah, they're being mean, but it doesn't take me, I don't think about it for 2 days. Like, I'll think about it in the moment, of course, like anyone else would. And then I'm like, okay, like moving on with my life. And the same the other way. I don't like immediately have all these feelings for someone just because they're being nice to me. I'm like, okay, like, that's nice, but it doesn't cause any kind of crazy intensity, whereas before it's like I couldn't help it. It just took me, like my emotions took me and I went with them, and I couldn't like separate the reality from what I was feeling. And a lot of the time it was just, it was not correct. And also these intense feelings, like for example, dating someone looked like having a lot of intense feelings for them for the first week or month, and then being like, what am I doing here? Like, why? Which is really bad. Like, it wasn't funny. I didn't want to do that, but it's just in the moment, it all felt so real. And it got to the point where I was like, I don't want to date because I don't know how to date. Like, I don't know how to do it. And I feel like either I end up getting hurt or the other person ends up getting hurt. And there's no way that with this way of me being, that it's going to lead to like anything healthy and long term. And, like, I want a husband for the rest of my life. So I still haven't dated, so I can't comment on that, how the meds have helped with that. But yeah, I definitely feel like they've diminished a lot of anxiety as well. It's like, I've always felt in the past that I had just this like, I think it's called like impending doom, where you always have this in the back of your head that, yeah, I don't know, it's just this anxiety of everything being wrong or going wrong or not being good enough or whatever. And it's just constantly there in the back of your head, and everything you do comes from that decision. Whereas now I don't feel that. Like, I don't feel like I need to rush everything. I don't feel like everything's going to go wrong tomorrow. I don't feel those things. Or when I start thinking a certain way, again, I can change my way of thinking easy. Now, it hasn't been, I started taking the meds in April, I think, and it's August now. So it's only been, 4 or 5 months, coming up to 5 months. So I think that this is just the beginning. And what I've seen so far is really incredible. And I never would have thought that, taking medication would have these changes on me. I kind of felt like it would maybe help me concentrate, and that was like my best case scenario. I'll be able to concentrate at work. Great. Then when he said that, it lowered my depression stuff, I was like, I mean, great, who doesn't want that? But I didn't realize that it would really, just like my friend said to me when she was describing her journey with medication, that she felt like herself, finally, after years of suffering, she finally felt like herself. And that's what I felt like, when I experienced all these benefits, I guess, or all these positive changes. And I find myself, for example, it's easier for me to talk to people. I think about things differently. I approach things different. And I was like, this is who I am. Like, the person that I've been like all this time, and all these things that I hated myself for, like the social anxiety, they were just the byproduct of the ADHD, but they're not who I am. Like, now that I'm balanced out, this is who I am. And this is who I was, but I just needed to like put this puzzle in there to make it complete, make the whole picture complete. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, it definitely feels incredible. I'm not planning to come off of the medication. I think that, if one day, for example, I want to start a family, I would have to, which is kind of scary. Maybe, at some point I can talk to my psychiatrist about it, whether, there is a point, like, let's say all these long-term habits are changing, because my understanding is that a lot of the things that we develop as, as we're growing up and whatever, because ADHD is something that you're born with. It's a childhood disease that we take into adulthood with us. It's not that you just develop it when you're an adult. So my understanding is that as we're growing up, our environment shapes us to take on behaviors that help us mask or cope with, whatever is happening. So, some people develop really good coping mechanisms to the point where they stay organized, they stay focused, they're able to do whatever they need to do. It costs them a little bit more effort than the average person, but they manage really well, and they don't need to be taking medication. Maybe just therapy, or maybe not even therapy. They just, have worked it out. So I wonder if, at one point where I feel like I've done, like, my long-term habits and thinking has changed, and like the new neural pathways have developed, if, coming off of the medication and just kind of trying to incorporate coping mechanisms would help, or if it would just crash me and, I would just burn in suffering. I don't know. Maybe we'll find out at some point. Definitely not now. I'm enjoying my new life, just being somewhat average. And I definitely recommend to anybody who was like me and was scared of medication. And by the way, no crazy side effects. Like, I didn't have any nausea. I didn't have like headaches. My stomach doesn't hurt. Like, there's nothing happening. The only thing I would say is that it does suppress my appetite a little bit. So I have to, be mindful of that and keep my eating disorder under control. So, because, my first thought was like, appetite suppression, great. But then I was like, no, that's just, I don't want to go there. So, just being mindful of that and keeping a healthy diet is important. I've also heard that, magnesium helps, and I do supplement with magnesium, and apparently it's good for everybody, really. other than that, I haven't seen any negative side effects, and I hope I won't. So yeah, if you are in that same spot, definitely try it. If you feel like it could help you. If it doesn't, then you can just come off of it, or you can try a different one or whatever. But I think that a lot of us don't realize how much better our lives can get. And some of it happens on such a subtle level, but it has so much impact in like your everyday being. And at the end of the day, like everything compounds. So the good days compound. If you concentrate even 6 days out of the week, it's better than being able to just do 2 or 1. And then, you can get further in wherever you're going, or being able to stay more consistent with things, and, just feeling more joy, I think is worth it. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Oh my, I can't believe this took 45 minutes. If you stayed until the end, or you'd have to be here to listen to this. So yeah, let me know what you think, and what are your why are you even here? Why are we watching this? Like, is it because you're also thinking about ADHD meds, or you just came here by accident and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing here? Either way, it's fine. Welcome, and thank you for listening.